Now we're going to look at loops. Loops is where programs really show their firepower to be able to do something repetitive indefinitely. They don't get bored like people do. They can just run these tasks very quickly and efficiently. So there's two main types of loops. We're going to look at while loops, which have a condition. The program will keep looping until this condition is met. You cannot break out of this part of the code. When the condition is met, then it moves to the rest of the program. And then there's for loops, where for loops will set up parameters. As we work through these examples, you'll see where the differences are and where you will use them in different situations. So I'm not going to use Scratch for these examples because Scratch is a little bit counterintuitive to how text-based programs work. So I'm just going to do these in Python and JavaScript. So the first one we're going to look at is the while loop. So if we have a look at our pseudocode here, we're getting the user input. We're setting up a loop condition that is going to run until a condition is met. And that just sits in here. And if the condition is met, well, then it breaks out of the loop and the code continues to run through. So the example we're going to do today is a password match. If you guess the password, well, then the code moves on. Otherwise it loops and it keeps asking you to enter the password. So to make things simple, we're just going to have the password as the letter A. So let's have a look at the steps we'll need to do. Okay, so the first step is to get user input. And we're going to store that in a variable called password attempt. We could call it anything we like. It's just a place to store the user's input. Now we're going to set up a condition that says while, and this lets Python know that you're setting up a while condition, while this variable does not equal the string form of the letter A. Then a colon to set up the indented code. What we want to display is the input. However, we need, as well as the input, we need whatever the person types in here again to try and match the letter A. So essentially, we can copy the whole line from the top. So basically we're saying, here it is the first time. If you get it right, well then you'll move down to here. If you don't get it right, the code moves into here and puts the same question forward, and it will stay in here until you get it. And so if the condition is met, well then we just output, you got it. Now the program moves on to the next line of code. So let's see how our program works. So we know that the password is the letter A. So I'm going to try a few letters first. Now when I hit A, you can see it has moved out of this cycle here and has moved to the next block of code. So we'll be using this later on in a higher or lower game. We guess a number between 1 and 20, and if you're higher or lower, it will keep looping that until you actually get the match of the number. There's plenty of games that will use this sort of application. So that's the while loop in Python. Let's have a look at the while loop in JavaScript. So first step is to get the user input, and just to be consistent, so the first step is to get the user input. So while the user input does not equal A, so similar logic, just a little bit difference in the syntax. So while brackets, this is where the condition is. So while this variable does not equal the letter A, and instead of a colon and indentation, we do curly braces and we write our code in here. And again, we're going to do exactly what we did in Python, is we're going to give the people a chance to break out of the loop. So this is a key point, and I've done this thousands of times. I've written an infinite loop. When the program starts looping here, you cannot stop it. So you need something in there to stop the loop. So by putting in a prompt box, it stops the loop and it gives the users a chance to again put in some user input into this variable and compare that to the letter A, so that if they do match, well then we can get out of the loop. So this is the very first line. So if I do, so we're now in the loop, we're now into here, and so this is what's popping up now. And if I get the match, well then it works. So let's say we didn't do this properly. Let's say we only put in the prompt box. So this is going to crash. I'll just warn you that ahead of time. So even though I've put in the prompt box, which will break the loop, there's nowhere for me to input again to compare to the letter A. We had the first chance, but it won't work again. So let's see. If I run this and I put in the correct password, that's fine because it's this line. The criteria meets before we get into the loop and it goes to the next line. But if I run it again and I put in, so we can see we're in the loop, and if I put in the correct, we're still in the loop because my user input isn't being stored in a variable in here. The prompt gives us the ability to type in, but it's not storing that value anywhere. So that's a very key point. So now there's no way to stop this. So I really have to write the whole program again, unless I was smart enough to copy it somewhere else. And you can refresh the browser in a new tab, put in the code, and with the change in it before it runs. So in a classroom situation, loops can be quite tricky. So it's a really good idea to make it as simple as possible, and I might even suggest using some online environments such as W3 Schools that have some good loop examples a couple of times to get comfortable with it before you start writing your own. So the for loop is slightly different to the while loop, and you would use the different loops while or for different situations. So let's have a look at where we would use a for loop. So let's say we wanted a program that output from 0 through to 200 out here. In Python, we have the for loop. We set up the variable, let's just call it I, and in the range from 0 to 200. So behind the scenes that would actually run, and now we've indented the code so that we output the value of this variable I. If I click on run, in an instant I get an output of 0 down to, if I wanted 200, I would just put one less. So basically this variable starts at 0, outputs, goes to 1, outputs, goes to 2, outputs, until it gets to 201, and it breaks out before it outputs. Now if you wanted the output to be horizontal rather than vertical, you can put in a second parameter, and end equals an empty space. Now that we've got that output from 0 to 200, we could actually make it from 0 to 2000. It does take a little bit longer depending on your computer. We've output from 0 to 2000. And because we have a range, we could go from 1000 to 2000. Now, if we only had a small range from 0 to 30, we don't have to put the 0 in if we're starting from 0. So if we wanted to go from 10 to 30, well then you would need both parameters. If you want to start from 0, you don't have to put in the 0. So now once you've got output, you can actually concatenate words with the output. So if I went, there are plus now, when I go to run this, there will be the issue of strings and integers not matching. So we could set up the I variable to be a string. Well, there is a bit of a shortcut where we could use a comma. And when we use a comma, it actually provides a space as well. So we don't need the space in here. And so if I had 300, or if I wanted from 200 to 850. Now, quite often a place that you would use for loops is that you've got some data. Let's say you've got a word and each character in the word, and if you wanted to separate the characters and then join them back together, that's the kind of scenario where you would use a for loop in addition to what we're doing here. So let's now have a look at JavaScript for a for loop. So we use the keyword for, and we have the conditional brackets here. We're setting up the value of this variable called I. We'll call it 0 initially. Then the next part is the condition. As long as I is less than 201, and we want to increment, and we can decrement as well. So that's our three parts. Declare the value of that variable I. What's your condition? At what point does the loop stop? And we tell it whether we want to increment or decrement. If we do nothing here, we won't get a loop. It won't change. The value of 0 won't know to increment all the way up to 201. And now our output brackets, and I'm just going to document.write the value of this variable. Now this is the opposite to Python, where it's horizontal by default. So I want to add in a plus BR for break. And now we can concatenate this one. And JavaScript is a bit friendlier. Now, as before, we could set the starting value of this variable to 100. We could go the other way. Now, because we're going the other way, we have to be, as long as I is greater than 10. So we start at 100, we're going to go backwards. And when it gets to 11 and we decrement, is when it breaks out of the loop.